Hello, my friend, and welcome to Seth's Sleep Sanctuary. My name is Seth, and I'm truly honored to be your guide tonight. You've done enough today. You've carried a lot. You've shown up, even if the world didn't quite notice. But now, it's time to let go, to soften, to be wrapped in a story that doesn't ask you to remember, solve, or worry. A story that only wants you to breathe slower and feel safe as sleep gently finds you. So tonight, let me take you far from the noise of your day, back to a time when sleep was sacred, back to the warmth of the ancient world. There was once a quiet village nestled at the edge of the desert, far beyond the reach of kings and pharaohs. No maps led to it. No traders passed through. And yet, it was one of the most peaceful places on earth. In that village, bedtime was not an afterthought. It was a ceremony, a sacred practice passed down from generations, a way of entering the night gently, soulfully, slowly. And the one who kept that ritual alive was a woman known only as Old Ma'ani. She was not feared nor worshipped, but deeply trusted. Every evening before the last sunlight faded into soft shadow, Mahani would begin her rounds. Her home was small, made of mud brick and reed, yet full of fragrances: crushed blue lotus, dry lavender, bits of sweet resin, and cedar bark warming in a clay bowl. She'd sit by the entrance, facing the last rays of the sun, gently grinding herbs between her palms, whispering soft prayers in a voice as smooth as a worn river stone. Children, tired from a day of playing under the wide desert sky, would stop by with their parents, not to be healed, but to be stilled. "Come," Ma'ani would say softly. "Let me prepare you for night." It was never loud. There were no chants, no theatrics, only her rhythm, calm, slow, comforting, like the earth breathing beneath their feet. Tonight, let's visit that village together. Let's imagine you are one of the children, still young in spirit, wandering through the golden dust as the day winds down. You walk barefoot, your steps soft, your heart a little tired, your body needing rest but not quite knowing how to begin. As the sky turns a dusky violet, you follow the scent, that gentle, sweet trail of herbs and earth, until you reach her home. Old Ma'ani is waiting for you. She doesn't ask questions. She doesn't need to. She simply pats a woven mat beside her and nods once. And you sit. The air smells of warm bark, soft flowers, and something deeper, something ancient and good. "Let the day fall away," she murmurs, barely above a whisper. You close your eyes. Not fully, just enough to feel the weight of them, to begin letting go. She takes a warm cloth from a bowl beside her and gently wipes your forehead, your cheeks, your palms, each motion slow, each movement full of meaning. This cloth has been soaked in water steeped with wild desert herbs, herbs that the villagers only gather on full moon nights when the wind is calm and the stars are bright enough to see the shimmer of crystals in the sand. The cloth is warm and smells faintly of chamomile, a bit of basil flower, and something that feels like safety. She presses it against your chest for a moment, right where your heartbeat is strongest. you feel the warmth seep into your skin, into your ribs, into your breath. Now, she says gently, breathe like the river. You don't know what that means at first, but somehow your body understands. You breathe in and out like slow water against stone. Ma'ani begins to hum, low, steady, a tune that has no beginning, no end. It rocks you, not in motion, but in feeling. The world around you fades, not in darkness, but in softness. There are no more tasks, no more decisions, just the steady beat of your own breath, the scent of crushed herbs, and her hum. Behind her, inside the home, you hear the low crackle of an oil lamp. It dances against the mud walls, casting little shadows that sway like tall reeds in wind. She opens a small woven basket beside her. Inside are bundles wrapped in palm leaves. She unwraps one, and from within pulls out a single glowing coal. On it, she places a pinch of powdered root, something ancient, passed down through mothers and daughters for generations. It sizzles slightly and releases a slow, curling smoke. It smells like honey and rain and old stories. You inhale gently. It feels like something inside you that had been clenching finally softens. She wraps you lightly in a cloth, not heavy, just enough to feel held. And then she begins her story, not with words, but with the rhythm of her voice, a language only the body understands. You are drifting through time, drifting through comfort. In her story, you are weightless, floating on a boat made of papyrus down a quiet river under a full moon. The stars above are bright, not loud, but like small, quiet friends. The river is warm, the breeze is soft, and every sound is kind. You pass tall date palms leaning into the water, their leaves rustling softly in approval of your rest. You feel the gentle rock of the boat, the slight creak of wood, and the cool, round presence of a clay jug at your side, filled with sweet, calm water. In the distance, a heron lifts its wings. It doesn't fly away, just shifts, reminding you to breathe again. And you do. Each breath a little slower, each moment a little softer. Old Ma'ani's voice fades to a murmur. Her hands rest gently on her knees. The ritual is almost complete. Not because she stops, but because you've begun to continue it yourself. Your own breath has taken over the rhythm. Your own body has found the current. Sleep, like the river, is no longer something to chase. It is something you are floating in now. Ma'ani leans in close, just once, and whispers, "You've returned to the way your ancestors slept." And maybe you have, because there is no more tension in your jaw, no more clenching in your chest, only softness, only warmth, only the lull of the desert wind brushing over woven walls. Somewhere in the village, a jackal calls once, distant, almost dreamlike. But even that sound doesn't disturb you. It's part of the rhythm now, Your eyelids, heavy as dusk, finally close. And there you are, floating, resting, dreaming, in the arms of an ancient ritual older than memory. Old Ma'ani smiles to herself. She knows she won't need to wake you. The night will carry you now. The story isn't over. It never truly ends. But for now, let yourself drift. Let yourself rest. Let sleep have you, fully, kindly, deeply. You are safe here. You are held. You are home. The wind that moved through the village that night was unlike the wind of any other. It did not rush, nor howl, nor even stir the palm leaves too much. It simply drifted, like breath from the lips of the earth itself, carrying with it the sense of crushed bay leaves, warm stone, and distant fires that had long stopped crackling. In the quiet of old Ma'ani's courtyard, the coals had long cooled, and the hum of her evening song had faded into the dust. But the ritual, that secret nighttime practice, continued, not just in her presence, but in the hearts of those who had come to sit beside her. That night, while most of the village lay still beneath their linen sheets and reed-woven roofs, one boy remained awake, a quiet soul named Quito. Quito was small for his age, with eyes that often wandered upward, not just to the stars, but somewhere far beyond them. While others played and ran barefoot after goats and geckos, Quito lingered near shadows, listening to the silence between sounds. He was the kind of child who did not fight sleep, but could not always find it. And so that evening, long after Ma'ani had sent the others home with soothed hearts and sleepy limbs, Quito remained at her gate, silent. Ma'ani saw him. She always saw him. She didn't speak. She simply unwrapped a corner of the woven mat, patting it gently. Quito padded over quietly, sat beside her, and folded his legs under himself like a careful heron. He didn't know how to ask for what he needed. He never really did. But Ma'ani understood. She reached for a small pouch beside her, a faded cloth bag the color of midnight, and opened it gently. Inside were thin shavings of an old root, slightly curled like ancient parchment, dark and fragrant with time. She held one up to the firelight. It shimmered slightly, as though remembering something sacred. She placed a piece into a cup of warm water and stirred once, twice, then waited. The water turned the color of sunset, not bright, but soft, like clay dust caught in golden hour. Quito took the cup with both hands. It was warm, heavy, grounding. Ma'ani didn't tell him what was in it. She never explained her mixtures. But he knew it wasn't just for the body. It was for the spirit, the wandering part of him that stayed awake even when his eyes closed. He took a sip, then another. Then, slowly, he exhaled, as if for the first time all day. Ma'ani reached behind her and drew out a small pot wrapped in a blanket. From it, she took out a ball of soft dough, not yet baked, not yet finished. It was cool to the touch, and she placed it in Quito's palms. "Hold it," she whispered. "Let it take your worry." He frowned slightly, unsure, but the dough was soft, malleable, quiet. so he pressed his thumb into it, rolled it between his fingers, smoothed it along his palm. And as he did, something strange happened. His thoughts, the ones that flew like bats in his mind each night, began to slow, to land, to rest. He pressed a spiral into the dough, then a small moon, then just lines, like the ripples he saw in the village well whenever he tossed a pebble in. And the more he shaped it, the more his breath began to mirror his movements. Slow, smooth, soft. Ma'ani said nothing. She simply watched the way his shoulders fell just slightly lower, the way his jaw softened, the way his eyelids blinked slower and slower between shapes. She reached for a wooden bowl nearby, lifting its lid. Inside were crushed leaves, pale green, nearly silver in the firelight, and a few dried petals that fluttered like moth wings. She took a pinch and sprinkled it into a little cloth square, tying it with a string made from reed fibers. She passed the pouch to Quito, motioning for him to place it under his tunic, near his heart. He obeyed. The scent was faint, a whisper of sweetness, something like fennel, something like rain. "That will stay with you," she said at last, her voice barely louder than the wind. "It's not a charm. It's a reminder." Quito looked up at her, confused. "Of what?" he asked. Ma'ani smiled, not a wide smile, but one that lingered long after it had faded. "That your body knows how to sleep. You don't need to force it. Just remember how." And just like that, the ritual deepened. Not in action, but in stillness. She told him a story, but not with her voice. With her breath, her presence, the crackle of the fire beside her, the creak of the clay roof above, the faint patter of night insects just beyond the woven fence. Quito closed his eyes, still holding the dough, still breathing in the pouch's scent, still sitting near the warmth of someone who expected nothing from him but to rest. And the world slowed. In his mind, he saw images, not dreams exactly, but more like memories from somewhere far beyond his own life. A slow-moving ox under a fig tree, a hand dipping into cool water, the sound of stone grinding grain on a morning far away. These things didn't make sense to his waking mind, but they comforted him, made him feel part of something older than worry, older than sleeplessness, and slowly, like night soaking into sand, sleep came, not all at once, but kindly, gently, softly. By the time Ma'ani reached over and took the half-formed dough from his hand, his fingers were slack. She covered him with a thin cloth and leaned back, listening to the rhythm of his breath. The ritual was not always made of herbs and pouches and pressed dough. Sometimes, the secret practice was simply presence. The knowing that sleep is not a door you must kick open. It is a path that remembers your feet, even when you've forgotten the way. And in that village, far beyond kings and clocks, the practice lived on. not through teaching, but through being, night after night, body after body, breath after breath. The story you are hearing now is not a story at all. It is a lullaby made of centuries, a song of dusk that plays beneath the silence, and it is here for you, too. So even now, as your own body lies still beneath the weight of your covers, even now, as your fingers rest, your eyelids flutter, and your thoughts slow into soft, silent waves, remember, you do not need to do anything, not even sleep. Just rest. Just breathe. Let the nighttime practice remember you. Let it wrap around you like the desert wind. Let it carry you. Float, sink, drift. The fire is low. The mat is warm. The scent of crushed flowers hangs gently in the air. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of an old village you've never seen, yet somehow know, Ma'ani still hums. The coals still glow, and the night still welcomes you again and again and again. It was one of those nights when the stars seemed to lean in closer than usual, not twinkling fast, but pulsing slowly, as if they too were breathing in rhythm with the earth. The desert was quiet. Even the wind had decided to sleep. In that kind of silence, the night didn't feel empty. It felt full, with softness, with memories, with the warm hush that only arrives when the world knows you are trying to rest. And it was on such a night that little Senya couldn't sleep. She lay curled on her mat in the corner of her family's home, a round hut with a domed ceiling of woven grass, smooth clay walls, and the scent of ground millet and sweet smoke in the air. Her brothers were already dreaming, their slow, steady breaths like music that played from far away. Her mother lay still too, one arm draped protectively across her youngest. But Senya, her eyes would not close, not fully. She stared at the curved ceiling above, following the patterns the firelight had left behind like rivers made of gold and shadow. Something in her chest felt unsettled. Not pain, not fear, just a weight, a stirring. She couldn't explain it. And so she rose, slowly, quietly, careful not to wake anyone. Barefoot, she stepped into the night. The ground was cool under her soles. The air was soft, brushing her cheeks like the memory of a lullaby she used to hear but couldn't quite remember. She walked without knowing where she was going, only that her heart pulled her forward and her feet obeyed. Past the empty cooking stones, past the old fig tree with the crooked trunk, past the slumbering goats, curled like stones in the sand, until she saw it, the glow, Ma'ani's hut. The light inside was low, just enough to guide, not to call. But Senya knew it was for her. She stepped forward. The reed curtain lifted gently, as if moved by an unseen hand. And there was Ma'ani, seated cross-legged as always, her palms resting on her knees, her eyes already on Senya before the girl even said a word. Senya hesitated at the doorway. She didn't know what to say. She didn't have a reason. But Ma'ani did not ask. She simply lifted her chin ever so slightly, and Senya came in. She sat on the mat, the same one so many had sat on before. And Ma'ani, without speaking, reached for a small bowl beside her. Inside were tiny stones, smooth, round, warmed by the sun earlier that day. She poured them into Senya's hands. They clinked softly, like rain tapping a drum. Senya looked down at them, all slightly different, yet all belonging together. Some had speckles, some were deep earth brown, others had tiny streaks of red or gold. "Choose one," Ma'ani whispered. Senya picked the smallest, a pale gray stone shaped like a sleeping eye. Ma'ani nodded, as if the stone had chosen Senya too. She reached into her basket and brought out a small shallow bowl filled with oil, thick, golden, and smelling faintly of sage and sandalwood. She dipped her fingers in and gently anointed the stone, then passed it back to Senya. "Now hold it," she said, "like it's your question." Senya didn't fully understand, but her fingers closed around the stone. She imagined her worry, the strange weight in her chest, slipping into it. She imagined the stone remembering something for her, something she herself had forgotten. And with each breath, she felt a little lighter. Ma'ani opened a jar of fine black powder and traced a single line on the floor in front of them. Then another, then a third, until the lines formed a circle. She motioned for Senya to sit in its center. "You're inside your breath now," she said. Senya sat, and Ma'ani began to sing. Not loud, not even musical, just soft, rhythmic, more like a lullaby from the bones. Her voice didn't need lyrics. It spoke to the body in a language older than words. Senya felt the circle holding her. She felt the stone in her palm warming. She felt her breath slowing, matching the rise and fall of Ma'ani's chest, the rhythm of the crickets, the flicker of flame. And then Ma'ani stopped. The room was still. Senya opened her eyes, not fully, just enough to see Ma'ani now placing a folded cloth over a clay bowl. Steam rose from it, scented with cinnamon, fennel, and something floral and sweet. Ma'ani lifted it toward her and said, "Let this be your sky tonight." Senya leaned in. The steam kissed her cheeks. She closed her eyes fully now, and in her mind, the stone in her hand became a boat. A small, round boat floating on a night lake. The water was smooth, deep, endless. The sky above shimmered, full of stars she recognized but didn't know by name. She felt herself reclining inside the boat, arms at her side, the cloth Ma'ani had placed earlier, now wrapped around her like wings. The boat rocked gently. The water hummed. And Senya, she did nothing. She didn't try to sleep. She didn't try to stay awake. She simply drifted. She let the secret practice carry her. In that sacred floating space between waking and sleep, she felt her body loosen. Her thoughts, once tight like knots, became ribbons unraveling in soft water. The boat passed through reeds that whispered secrets, old lullabies about stars that watched over dreamers, and wind that carried their wishes across the sky. Somewhere in her floating mind, she heard Ma'ani's voice. There is a place inside you where night lives. Go there. Rest. And she did, without fear, without question, just trust, just quiet, just the kind of peace you don't earn. But remember, back in Ma'ani's hut, the steam faded, the fire dimmed, and Senya, curled on the mat, eyes closed, fingers still gently holding her chosen stone, slept, not like a child lost in dreams, but like a traveler who had come home. Ma'ani smiled. She took the bowl of steam and placed it outside, letting the last of the scent drift into the village. She didn't wake Senya. She never woke anyone. The practice knew when to end, and when not to. In the homes nearby, others stirred lightly in their sleep, not waking, just adjusting, as if some part of them had felt the story too, as if the ritual, ancient and invisible, had reached them in their slumber and tucked them in again. Because that was how it worked. Not all who benefited from it sat beside Ma'ani. Some simply felt its ripple, the way a pond feels the breeze even when no pebble touches it. And so, the night deepened. The stars pulsed slower. The air stilled even more. And the village, wrapped in this sacred hush, dreamed deeper than before. Ma'ani sat a while longer, watching. She didn't need sleep the way others did. She rested with her eyes open, with her soul rooted in the hush of the night. She watched the slow flicker of flame, the shadows cast by the reed curtain, the small content rise and fall of Senya's chest. And still, she did not move, because some parts of the ritual cannot be rushed. Some peace takes time, and some sleep, the deepest kind, arrives only when invited gently. And Ma'ani was the invitation. Outside, a faint breeze returned at last, brushing through the fig trees and lifting a single curled leaf into the air. It drifted, much like the boat in Senya's dream, into the darkness, and the world remained soft, still, safe. The morning had not yet come, but the first hush of dawn was beginning to brush against the edge of the sky. That tender moment when the night isn't quite gone, and the day hasn't yet begun. A bluish-gray veil draped over the village, soft and cool like the inside of a shell. Inside her small hut, Ma'ani remained awake, though her body was still. She always woke before the birds, before the sun, before even the wind found its way through the narrow paths of the village. She didn't need an alarm. Her body followed the rhythm of the stars, the pulse of the earth beneath the reed mat, this morning was different. Not heavier, not urgent, just different. She felt it in her bones, in the quiet way the air moved, in the way her clay lamp flickered without breeze. Someone needed her, but they hadn't arrived yet. So she waited, and while she waited, she prepared. She reached for a bowl carved from the dark heart of a fig tree, one she had used only a few times, and only on nights when the dreams of others were too tangled to undo with words alone. Into the bowl she dropped 3 things. A sprig of dried sage crumbled softly between her fingers. A slice of dried orange peel, saved from a harvest many moons ago. And a few grains of white salt, collected from the basin just beyond the hills, where the desert met the water's memory. She added a splash of warm water from a clay jug. The scent rose slowly, bitter, sweet, grounding. She whispered a word over it, not a word in any known tongue, but the kind of word trees might understand. Then she placed the bowl beside her mat, letting the mixture sit, waiting for the one it was meant for. It wasn't long before she heard it. Not footsteps, but breath. Shallow, uneven, approaching. The reed curtain rustled, and in stepped an older man, not old in body, but in spirit. His name was Quadwo, and he was known in the village for his silence. He had once been a musician before the quiet took him, before his dreams became full of echoes. He hadn't played in many seasons. His fingers, once nimble, now trembled in stillness, not from age, but from something deeper, something sleep couldn't soothe. And so, tonight, he had come to Ma'ani, not with words, but with the weight of his body, which carried the kind of tiredness that no rest seemed to ease. He stood at her doorway, unsure. Ma'ani nodded once. Quadwo stepped inside. She pointed to a low wooden stool carved with spirals, a stool that had belonged to her teacher, and her teacher's teacher before that. He sat. His shoulders were heavy, as though the music still lived inside him but had nowhere to go. Ma'ani reached for the bowl of warm mixture and placed it in his hands. "Hold it," she said gently. He did. His fingers wrapped around the wood. His palms drank the warmth. "Don't sip yet," she whispered. "Let it speak to you first." Quadwo closed his eyes. The scent drifted toward him, not with sharpness, but like an old friend entering the room. And slowly, his shoulders lowered. Ma'ani reached for a small cloth bundle beside her, wrapped in soft goat wool and tied with reed string. She opened it. Inside was her ancient flute, carved from river bamboo, smoothed over countless evenings of song and silence. She had not played it in many moons, but tonight it called. She lifted it to her lips and blew a note, just one. Low, warm, deep. It hung in the air like a sigh too big for any chest to carry alone. She played another, then another. and as the notes slipped into the corners of the hut, Quadwo felt something move inside him. Not pain, not sorrow, but remembering. He remembered the first time he made music, not with an audience, not with applause, but alone, under a tree, where no one listened but the wind and a single bird. That memory, small and sacred, floated to the surface of his mind, and the part of him that had locked itself away all these seasons opened. His breath deepened, his jaw unclenched, his hands softened around the bowl. Ma'ani's music didn't ask him to play again. It simply reminded him that he could feel again, that he could rest. She played a song that had no melody, no rhythm, just presence, just breath turned into tone. When she stopped, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt complete. Quadwo opened his eyes, and a single tear slid down his cheek. Not a tear of sorrow, but of release. He looked at Ma'ani. Still no words passed between them, but none were needed. She motioned to the bowl. He drank. The warmth traveled slowly through him, down his throat, across his chest, settling in his belly like a low fire at dusk. She laid out a mat beside the stool and patted it gently. Quadwo lay down. For the first time in many moons, his limbs did not resist rest. Ma'ani reached for a pouch filled with soft petals and herbs and placed it under his neck. She whispered something to it, then leaned back. The hut was quiet. Quadwo's breath, once erratic and shallow, now moved in a smooth tide. In, outside, in, outside. He had returned to the place inside himself that sleep had abandoned, and now it welcomed him home. Outside, the first bird of morning called once, softly, a gentle reminder that the world would wake soon. But inside the hut, sleep held its ground, and Ma'ani did not stir it. Because rest, when found after such a long journey, must be honored. Quadwo would rise again. Not yet, not now. But when he did, something in him would have shifted. Not healed, perhaps, but softened. And that, Ma'ani knew, was enough. The secret nighttime practice was not about fixing. It was about remembering. And Quadwo, like the others before him, had remembered something sacred. He had remembered how to surrender, and the night had received him kindly. By the time the sky had fully turned to light, Ma'ani was already walking. Not in haste, never in haste, but with that same smooth pace she used for all things, unhurried, grounded, as if her steps followed some silent drumbeat beneath the sand. She left no footprints, not because she was spirit, but because the earth itself made room for her. The village was stirring. Soft voices, clinking pots, the scent of ground grains and smoke beginning to rise. But Ma'ani was not headed toward the center of the village. This morning, her path curved along the edge, where the stones grew hot quicker and the wells ran deeper. She was going to see Mansa. Mansa, who had not left her home in weeks. Not from illness, but from a kind of weariness no one had words for. She was known for her laugh once, a big, rich sound that could shake dust from the leaves and send goats trotting in the other direction. But lately she had gone quiet. Not sad, just quiet in a way that made the air around her feel too still. Her door was closed when Ma'ani arrived, but that didn't matter. Ma'ani stood outside and simply waited. And after a moment, the door opened. Mansa stood there in her wrap cloth, hair tied loosely, eyes heavy with the kind of tiredness that sleep never fully seemed to touch. She didn't speak, just stepped aside, and Ma'ani entered. The room smelled faintly of charcoal and something bitter, like roasted roots and forgotten moments. Ma'ani didn't speak either. She just reached for a small clay pot she had brought, tied carefully with a wide palm leaf. She opened it. Inside were dark green leaves soaked in oil and sun. She reached into the bundle and pulled out a paste, placing it gently in a shallow bowl. Then she gestured for Mansa to sit. Mansa hesitated, but her body obeyed. She sat. Ma'ani dipped 2 fingers into the paste and began pressing it gently at the crown of Mansa's head. Slow circles, tiny movements that barely moved the skin, but somehow reached deeper than the scalp. The paste smelled of neem, lemongrass, and something softer. Something floral, like the memory of sweetness after rain. As Ma'ani massaged, Mansa's eyes began to close, not from sleep, but from surrender. Her shoulders softened, her jaw loosened. And then, as Ma'ani's hands moved to her temples, something released. Mansa let out a long, slow breath, one she had been holding in pieces for weeks. Ma'ani said nothing. She simply hummed, low and low and low, like the sound of a gourd being rocked by river waves. Mansa swayed with it, and then, without meaning to, she cried. Not loud, not broken, just quiet tears, the kind that came from too many full moons passed without release. Ma'ani wiped nothing. She just stayed there, humming, working the oil into Mansa's hair, down to her scalp, into the roots. The room changed. The air thickened. Not with heat, but with presence, with old stories, old women, old stars watching from above. Ma'ani reached for a cloth and wrapped Mansa's head, gently tying the ends under her chin. Then she poured warm water into a small copper bowl and added a few drops of infused blue lotus. The scent floated upward like a dream in reverse. She handed it to Mansa. "Drink slowly," she said. Mansa did. And for the first time in what felt like moons, her body remembered what it meant to rest without needing to lie down. She sipped. She breathed. She wept a little more. Then she smiled. Small, but real. Ma'ani smiled back. No words were exchanged. They were not needed, because sometimes the secret ritual before bed doesn't happen at bedtime. Sometimes it happens in the hush before day truly begins. Because sleep isn't just something that happens when the sun disappears. It begins much earlier, in the quiet choices of how we let go, even when we're still standing. And in that little hut on the village's edge, two women shared a silence deeper than dreams. A silence where no masks were needed, where the body could rest without apology, where the soul could stretch out and be. Later, after Ma'ani had gone, Mansa sat in her doorway with a pot of water and a single leaf floating inside. She did nothing. She watched the breeze lift the edge of her cloth. She let her thoughts pass like clouds, neither chased nor trapped. And that night, she slept. Not perfectly, not early, but deeply. And with each breath, she felt the oil on her scalp still working its way inward, still whispering to the places in her that the world had asked to be quiet. The ritual did not end when Ma'ani left. It continued in every drop of oil, in every 100, in every pause that said, "You are allowed to let go." And the village, though it didn't know, felt it. The animals rested better that night. The children dreamed gentler dreams. The trees swayed just a little slower. And Ma'ani? She walked back through the sandy path, her shadow long behind her, her mind already somewhere deeper than time. Because the secret ritual before bed was not just a practice. It was a remembering of how to return to softness, to breath, to self, to sleep. It had rained the night before. Not a hard storm, not even a drizzle, but the kind of slow, thoughtful rain that fell softly for hours, tapping lightly on rooftops, whispering against leaves, soaking into the ground like a blessing given in silence. By evening, the earth still smelled of it. The paths through the village were damp, the stones cool underfoot. The air felt softer, touched by something clean like the space after tears, or the hush that follows forgiveness. Ma'ani sat outside her hut that night, not weaving, not grinding herbs, not even preparing the evening bowls. She was simply sitting, listening, watching the moon rise behind the clouds, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her face tilted just enough to feel the change in air as it moved through the trees. The rain had left everything slower, and Ma'ani liked it that way. From across the field, a girl approached, carefully stepping over puddles, arms folded across her chest. She moved quietly, but her thoughts were loud. Ma'ani could hear them before the girl even reached her. Her name was Afia. She had always been strong, not in size but in will. Quick to help, quick to protect. Quicker still to hide how tired she truly was. Lately, her sleep had become shallow. She dreamed often, but never deeply. She would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, eyes open to the darkness. unsure what had startled her. There was no fear in her, only unrest. Ma'ani opened her eyes when Afia arrived. No questions were asked. Ma'ani simply shifted on her mat, and Afia sat beside her. The ground was cool. The sky was full of thick, moving clouds. A single frog chirped from somewhere near the fig tree, its voice cutting through the silence like a kind reminder. You are not alone. Ma'ani reached into her small side basket and brought out a long strip of woven cloth. She gently unrolled it, revealing 6 river stones, smooth and glistening from the earlier rain. Each one was warm, as though the earth had held onto the sun just for them. She placed them on the mat between them. Afia watched. Ma'ani didn't explain. She never explained. She simply tapped one stone, then another, then, with the softest of gestures, pointed to Afia's hand. Afia picked up a stone, held it. It was warmer than she expected. Not hot, but alive. She closed her eyes, and Ma'ani began to speak, but not of stories this time. She spoke of breath, of how each breath had its own path, from nose to chest, from chest to belly, from belly to earth. She told Afia to follow it, not force it, just follow. And Afia did. The wind moved gently through the trees. The clouds shifted, letting a single moonbeam slide down onto the path. Ma'ani added something to the air then, a handful of crushed bark thrown into a small clay bowl of coals. It crackled faintly, releasing a scent that was deep and woodsy, tinged with orange and rain. Afia's eyes fluttered once, then again, then closed. Ma'ani gently reached for her wrist, not to hold, just to rest her fingers above the pulse. It was steady, but high, still working, still bracing, still holding something tight. She let her fingers rest there as she whispered, "You don't have to carry everything tonight." Afia's lips parted slightly, as if something inside her had been waiting for permission to release. Ma'ani reached for a small shell bowl and took out a pale cream made from soaked lotus root and goat's milk. She rubbed a bit on Afia's temples, then down to the space between her collarbones. "It's for the space that forgets to rest," she said. Afia's breath deepened, not immediately, but slowly. One sigh at a time, each deeper than the last. Her hand still held the stone, but now her fingers had loosened around it. Ma'ani began to hum, not a song, not even a melody, just vibration, a sound that filled the space like a blanket warming from the inside out. Afia's chest rose, then sank, and Ma'ani knew. The stone had drawn the unrest from her. She reached forward and gently removed it from Afia's palm, placing it back in the woven cloth. Afia didn't notice. She was still, deeply. Ma'ani covered her shoulders with a light shawl, one woven with threads soaked in lavender oil from many moons ago. She didn't say a prayer. She didn't need to. The silence was full of them. Afia remained there for a long time, head tilted gently to the side, mouth slightly open, body curled in sleep not of exhaustion, but of return. She had found the door, the one Ma'ani always spoke of, though never directly. The one that opens not by force, but by surrender. When the moon passed overhead and began to slip west, Ma'ani rose slowly. She added a single drop of oil to the lamp, touched the coals once to check their warmth, then sat back beside the girl. She did not leave. She did not clean. She simply stayed, watching, listening, holding the quiet the way one holds something precious and old. Because Ma'ani knew, sleep is a place we all forget how to find sometimes. And sometimes, all it takes is someone waiting beside us while we remember. Outside, the rain had begun again, only faintly, just enough to kiss the leaves, just enough to say, even the sky knows how to let go. And Ma'ani smiled. The night that followed was different. It wasn't louder, it wasn't darker, but the sky had taken on a softer blue. The kind of blue that made you feel like the world was listening. Not to your voice, necessarily, but to your breath, to the thoughts you didn't say, to the parts of you too quiet for even language. That night, Ma'ani lit no lamps. She let the moon do the work. A full silver disk, steady and low, poured soft light through the roof of her hut, painting thin ribbons across the walls, her mat, and the few jars that lined the shelves. She didn't prepare any roots this time. No paste, no incense, no oil. She only waited. And in time, the door opened. A girl entered. Her name was Esenam. She was tall for her age, already walking with the kind of quiet grace that comes from listening more than speaking. But lately, that stillness had turned inward. Her mother said she no longer played, that she smiled, but only with her lips, that she said she was fine, but woke with tired eyes and long silences. Esenam had come because of a dream, one she could not remember, only the feeling it left behind, as if her chest had been full of wings, but none of them knew where to fly. Ma'ani motioned for her to sit. Esenam did, and for a while they just sat. The moonlight made patterns on the floor, like shadows swimming in milk. The night was warm, but not heavy. Ma'ani reached for a wooden bowl beside her. This one was different. Old, worn smooth with time, its bottom darkened from years of water and use. Inside was a folded cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing what looked like tiny stones, no larger than seeds, some round, some oval, all different shades of brown and red. Esenam looked at them, puzzled. Ma'ani took one between her fingers and placed it in Esenam's hand. It was warm, heavy somehow for its size. Ma'ani whispered, "This is not a stone. It is a memory." Esenam tilted her head. "Not yours," Ma'ani added, "but someone's. Maybe someone in you." Esanam closed her fingers around it, and Ma'ani began her story. There was once a tree, not tall, not thick, not even especially leafy. Just a small, slender tree in the middle of nowhere. It had no shade to offer, no fruit to give. But every night, birds came to sleep in its branches. Not because it was strong, but because it stood still. It never reached. It never pulled. It simply stayed, soft, still, present. And so the birds came, because what they needed was not shelter, but stillness. Ma'ani stopped speaking then, because the story didn't need more. Esanam sat quietly, holding the seed stone, her eyelids growing heavier by the second. Ma'ani reached forward and gently traced a small spiral on the back of Esanam's hand using her fingertip. No paste, no powder, just the touch, the shape of remembering. Esanam's breath deepened. Ma'ani placed both her hands over the girl's heart, not pressing, just resting. A kind of wordless lullaby passed between them, and Esanam exhaled. A sound so soft, so long, it was as if she had been holding that breath for weeks. Ma'ani covered her shoulders with a light cloth. The weave was old, but smelled faintly of lemongrass and the wind before a storm. She didn't sing. She didn't hum. She just stayed. As Esanam's breathing slowed, as the seed stone fell from her fingers and rolled onto the mat, as her eyelids drifted closed, counted stars through the gaps in the thatch, whispered stories to himself, wrapped his arms around his chest the way his mother used to do when he was small. But nothing worked. Sleep would not come. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't restless. He just couldn't close the door between waking and dreaming. It stayed slightly open, letting in too much thought, too much light, too much remembering. His aunt, seeing the soft blue circles beneath his eyes, finally said, "Go to Ma'ani." He didn't argue. He slipped out barefoot into the cool night and walked quietly beneath the old acacia trees. The wind kissed his cheeks. Somewhere behind the huts, a bird called once, then fell silent. Ma'ani was already waiting outside. She always knew. She made no gesture. She just turned and walked inside. He followed. Her hut was dim tonight. Only one lamp, and even that one was low. The flame barely a flicker above the oil. The air smelled of dusted cocoa pods, old bark, and something deeper, something calm. Ma'ani motioned for him to lie down. He did, resting on the mat near her low bench. Then she brought out a bowl filled with water. Not warm, not cold, just right. The way river water feels when the sun has already set, but left behind a little heat in the stones. She dipped a soft cloth in it, wrung it out gently, and placed it over his eyes. Everything darkened, but not in a frightening way. In a way that felt like coming home to a room where someone had already turned down the sheets. She placed her hand on his chest, not heavy, not pressing, just resting. Then, softly, she spoke. Sleep is not hiding. It is returning. He breathed in, then out. Slow, still. Mayamani dipped her fingers in a small clay jar beside her and rubbed a balm behind his ears, under his chin and over his wrists. The balm smelled like crushed nutmeg and the soft sweetness of dried mango peel. And slowly, Ni's limbs stopped curling. His fingers loosened. His mouth softened. She began to speak again, this time a story. Not a tale of kings or journeys, but of a small seed. A seed buried long ago. One that didn't bloom right away. It lay beneath the earth, listening, feeling, waiting for the right time. Seasons passed. The rains came. The heat, too. But the seed remained still. Until one night, without warning, it opened. Not with force, just quietly, and began to stretch upward. No one noticed, no one saw, but it grew anyway, because it trusted that its time had come. Ni felt that story in his body more than his ears. He felt the slow unfurling of something inside him, something that no longer needed to try, only to be, only to rest. Ma'ani lifted the cloth from his eyes. He didn't open them. She placed a small pouch near his feet, filled with grains, shells, and a piece of cotton soaked in sleep tea from 3 moons ago. Let this keep the door open, she whispered, but only for dreams. She didn't need to say more. His breath answered for him. Even, calm, carried. She sat beside him until the lamp flickered once, then went out. The hut glowed only with moonlight now, slipping through the roof's weave like threads of silver. Outside, the trees swayed gently. The bird did not call again. Even the breeze had softened. The night was full. And Ni, who had tried so hard to sleep, was now being held by it. The story, the balm, the silence. They had all worked their way through the places in him that didn't know how to rest. And now he was floating, somewhere between his breath and the moonlight, held, at peace. The village slept deeply that night. Even the dogs did not bark. The wind moved slowly between the huts, soft as breath, barely stirring the edges of the reed roofs. It carried a hush that felt sacred, as if even the wind had remembered how to rest. Far beyond the central path, where the sand met dry grass and the hills curved inwards like the arms of an old friend, Ma'ani sat beside a low fire. She hadn't prepared anything tonight. No oil, no tea, no cloth, only silence. She waited, because this night wasn't for mixing or mending. It was for holding space for the one who had forgotten what it meant to be held. And she came, eventually, barefoot, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the air. Her name was Adzo. She had not been seen for days. Not because she was lost, but because something in her had grown too heavy to carry into daylight. She hadn't planned to come, but her feet led her there, over dried roots and stones, down narrow paths, past the fig tree that only bloomed once a year. When she saw the fire, she paused. Ma'ani didn't speak. She only reached over and patted the empty mat beside her. Adzo sat. Her face held no expression, but her hands trembled slightly as they opened the folds of her shawl and laid it gently across her lap. Ma'ani placed a warm stone in her hands. It had been resting in the embers, wrapped in banana leaves to keep its heat slow and even. Adzo didn't flinch. She closed her fingers around it, and for a moment they sat like that. Two women, one fire, no words. Ma'ani finally whispered, "Some burdens do not belong in the day." Adzo nodded. Her shoulders dropped. Ma'ani reached for a small pot and poured a few drops of dark oil into her palm. It smelled like something old, bark and rain and the space beneath a tree where roots had grown undisturbed. She rubbed the oil between her hands, then placed one hand gently behind Adzo's neck, the other across her upper back. She said nothing, just breathed. And Adzo, for the first time in many moons, felt herself begin to breathe too. Not shallow, not scared, just present. With each breath, the fire crackled low. With each breath, the weight in her chest shifted. Not gone, not erased, but softened. Ma'ani leaned in and said, "You are not a burden for being tired." Adzo closed her eyes. The wind curled gently around them, lifting the smoke, carrying it away. Ma'ani reached into a pouch and removed a tiny bundle. Herbs wrapped in thin cloth, tied with blue thread. She placed it in Adzo's palm. "When you lie down," she said, "hold this. And remember, your healing does not need to look like joy. Sometimes it looks like breathing. Sometimes it looks like sleep." Adzo's lips parted slightly. Not a word, just a breath. And that was enough. Ma'ani reached for a second cloth and wrapped it around Adzo's shoulders. Not to warm, to hold, to remind, to soothe. She let the silence deepen between them. And when she finally hummed, low and steady, it was the kind of hum that didn't fill the space, but curved gently around it, like a river turning quietly at dusk. Adzo leaned forward, resting her head lightly against Ma'ani's shoulder, and the two sat like that until even the fire gave its last breath. The stars, thick above, blinked slower. The wind settled, and Ma'ani, who had said only a few words, knew the ritual was complete. Not because Adzo had spoken, not because she had smiled, but because her body, wrapped in sleep's promise, no longer resisted being held. Later that night, Adzo would lie on her mat, stone still warm at her feet, the small bundle resting just beneath her open hand. She would not toss, She would not stir. She would sleep, not with dreams, not with visions, but with something even softer. Peace, the kind that hums low inside the bones, the kind that says, you are not alone, you are not broken, you are simply tired, and tonight you may rest. That evening, the horizon turned gold long before the sun disappeared. It was the kind of golden light that felt slow, stretching across the tops of huts and trees, casting long, softened shadows that moved like ripples across the village. Everything seemed quieter. Even the animals paused, as if the world itself was beginning to exhale. In the center of the village, Ma'ani stood by the water jar. She dipped a small clay cup and held it to her lips, but didn't drink right away. Instead, she closed her eyes, listening to something that wasn't sound. A pull, a whisper, a shift. Someone needed her, but they didn't know it yet. And so, she waited. Far across the village, beneath a low-slung branch of the tamarind tree, a young woman sat on the ground, her knees drawn to her chest. Her name was Efua, and sleep had become a stranger to her, not because she didn't want it, but because she feared what came with it. Every time her eyes closed, she felt herself pulled back into thoughts too sharp, too loud, too sudden. Memories she didn't invite. Voices she had tried to silence. And so, she stayed awake, night after night, eyes open, body exhausted, mind full of too much. It was her grandmother who finally placed a hand on her back that afternoon and said, "Go." Efua didn't ask where. She already knew. She walked the path toward Ma'ani's hut as the last golden light brushed her cheeks. She didn't hurry. She didn't hesitate. She just walked. Ma'ani saw her coming and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the hut was warm but dark, the kind of darkness that didn't frighten, the kind of darkness that wrapped itself around you like velvet. The coals in the bowl glowed faintly. A single thread of smoke rose from a curled piece of cinnamon bark. Efua sat down slowly, her body moving like something brittle that had learned to hold itself too tightly for too long. Ma'ani knelt in front of her. She reached for a jar of ground root, dark red, almost like dried blood, and mixed it with a few drops of honey and water. She stirred in silence, then placed the small bowl into Efua's hands. "Not to drink," she said softly, "to hold." Efua did. The warmth of the bowl pulsed against her palms. Ma'ani placed a cloth across Efua's shoulders. Not heavy, just enough to feel safe. Then she sat beside her and began to rock gently, back and forth, back and forth, as if the hut itself was swaying in rhythm. Efua's eyes closed, then opened, then closed again. Ma'ani spoke only once. Let the warmth carry what the mind cannot. Efua's fingers tightened around the bowl. A single tear slid down her cheek. Not from pain, from release. The kind that happens when your body finally realizes it doesn't have to keep watch. Ma'ani reached for a small gourd and sprinkled crushed petals onto the coals. Blue lotus, rose, and a leaf that only grew during the Harmattan winds. The scent was subtle, familiar, like the memory of someone humming to you when you were too small to speak. Efua leaned into the cloth. Her head dipped slightly. Her breath slowed. Ma'ani reached for a small bell tied to a ribbon of thread the color of dusk. She did not ring it. She only held it near Efua's chest, letting its stillness reflect her own. She whispered something in a language no longer spoken, one she had learned from her teacher and her teacher before her. The room held the words like a cradle. Efua began to drift. She didn't know when. She didn't try. Her grip loosened on the bowl. Her shoulders fell, and Ma'ani placed the bowl aside gently, covering it with the cloth. She reached beneath the mat and pulled out a stone, flat, oval, cool to the touch, and placed it beside Efua's hand. It didn't need to be held, just known, just present. The fire dimmed lower. The coals softened to a faint orange breath, and Efua slept, deep, still, unwatched. She would not remember the scent, or the story, or even the bowl, but her body would remember what it felt like to be safe enough to rest, and that would be enough. Outside, the last of the golden light faded from the sky, leaving the stars to take its place. The wind moved again, lightly, carrying the scent of sleep through the village paths. And Ma'ani, as always, sat still, not keeping watch, only keeping presence. A soft rain had fallen in the early evening. Not enough to soak the ground, just enough to settle the dust and leave a shimmer on the leaves. The paths through the village glistened faintly in the moonlight, like scattered threads of silver stitching the huts together. The world felt quieter than usual. Even the frogs had fallen silent. And in that hush, a gentle knock sounded at Ma'ani's doorway. It was a boy this time, young, barely old enough to walk the village paths alone. But he had come without fear. His name was Kwaku. His sandals were wet, and his tunic clung to his skin from the rain, but his eyes were wide open, not with fright, but with longing. "I can't stop thinking," he said simply before Ma'ani could even ask. She nodded and stepped aside. Kwaku entered, and Ma'ani placed a dry cloth over his shoulders. It smelled of old sun and something like cassava bark. She gestured to the mat, and he lay down at once, not from exhaustion, but as though he had been waiting for permission to collapse. Ma'ani reached for a wooden tray beside the coals. On it were 6 tiny gourds, each filled with a different powder: orange, brown, pale green, deep gray, soft yellow, and one nearly white. She touched each one with her fingertip, then chose the pale green. She mixed a pinch into warm water and stirred it gently with a thin stick until it thickened slightly, like a cloudy tea. She didn't give it to Kwaku. Instead, she dipped her fingers in and gently pressed them to the soles of his feet. He flinched a little at first, then relaxed. Her touch moved slowly, not tickling, not deep, just steady, as if waking up something forgotten in his bones. As she worked, she began to hum, a melody as slow as a river in dry season. No words, just rise and fall, rise and fall. Kwaku closed his eyes, but his brow remained furrowed. Ma'ani noticed. She reached for a small pouch, one made of blue fabric tied with a piece of frayed twine, and took out a circle of bark. She pressed it into Kwaku's palm. "Close your hand," she said softly. "That is where your thoughts will stay tonight." He obeyed. The bark was dry and rough against his skin, but it grounded him, gave his fingers something to do besides clench around air. Ma'ani lit a small leaf on the coals. It crackled gently and sent a light smoke curling toward the ceiling, carrying the scent of roasted banana skin and lemongrass. "Listen," she whispered. And for the first time, he did. Not to her, not to the room, but to the space between his thoughts, the space where nothing shouted, nothing rushed, only waited. Ma'ani leaned in, resting one hand on his chest over the center of his ribs. "Your thoughts are not the enemy," she said. "They are just tired birds, circling. Let them perch. Let them rest." Kwaku's breath changed then. It deepened, slowed. The crease between his brows faded. His lips parted in sleep, the piece of bark still resting in his palm. Ma'ani reached over and covered him with a shawl. Then she whispered a final word, one he wouldn't remember, but his dreams would. Outside, the drizzle returned. Light, calm. The smell of wet soil filled the night. And inside the hut, sleep held the boy gently, like a reed boat floating on a silent stream. The air that night smelled of tamarind bark and stone. The earth was warm from the day's sun, but the breeze had changed, no longer carrying the dust of the village paths, but something lighter, like the scent of dreams just before they arrive. Inside her hut, Ma'ani moved slowly, not because she was tired, but because the stillness of the evening asked for slowness. Some nights were like that. Some nights whispered instead of called. She lit a candle made of palm wax and crushed leaves. Its flame was shy, small, flickering, uncertain, but it was enough. Tonight, she didn't prepare a pouch or grind any herbs. She simply sat and waited. And in time, the one who needed her came. He was not young. He was not old. He was the kind of person whose presence always seemed to pause before entering a room, as if asking permission from the very air. His name was Kojo, and sleep, for him, had become a thing of punishment. He could fall asleep, yes, but only to wake with his heart racing, breath shallow, the ghosts of worry pressed tight against his ribs. Each morning he woke more tired than the last. Each day his silence grew longer. He hadn't planned to come, but something had led him to Ma'ani's hut. Something softer than thought, but stronger than habit. She nodded as he entered. He sat without speaking. She looked at his hands. They were clasped tightly in his lap. Ma'ani leaned forward and held out a bundle of dried grass, thin, light, almost weightless. She said nothing. He looked at it, then took it. She motioned for him to untie it. Inside was a single feather and a small black bead. "That is all," she said. Kojo frowned gently, but Ma'ani just smiled. "They are your anchors tonight." She pointed to the mat, and he lay down slowly. She placed a cool cloth across his chest, not for healing, but for remembering. "The feather," she said, "reminds you to float." She laid it gently on his forehead. "The bead," she continued, placing it in the space between his thumb and forefinger, "reminds you to return." Kojo closed his eyes. His breath was shallow, but it was beginning to settle. Ma'ani leaned close and began to speak, her voice a whisper against the night. "There is a path beneath your sleep, one no one else can walk. It is yours. It has always been there, covered by thought, overgrown by worry. But it is still there, and tonight you may walk it again." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. She began to hum, not with sound, but with vibration. A low, steady rhythm that moved through the air like the quiet drumbeat of earth remembering itself. Kojo's body began to loosen. His fingers softened. The bead rolled gently in his palm. His chest rose, fell, rose again. Ma'ani placed her hands near his ankles, not touching, just hovering, as if drawing the weight of the day down and out through the soles of his feet. The candle flickered, its flame drawing small shadows across the roof. The air inside the hut was thick with calm. Kojo's jaw relaxed. His breath deepened. And in that quiet, he saw something, not with his eyes, but from somewhere farther in. He saw himself standing in a field of tall grass, the moon full above. He was barefoot, arms loose at his sides, wind on his skin. And for once, there was no pull, no weight, just being. He smiled, ever so slightly. Ma'ani saw it. She wrapped the feather in cloth and placed it near his shoulder. She tucked the bead beside his hand, and then she sat beside him in silence. Outside, a night bird sang, not loud, not lonely, just one clear note into the dark. Ma'ani tilted her head toward it and closed her eyes. Kojo slept, deeper than he had in many weeks, the kind of sleep that doesn't rush, that doesn't ask for dreams, that simply holds. It had been a still day, the kind where the trees didn't sway, and even the goats moved more slowly, as if the sun had pressed its warmth too deep into the ground, making everything feel a little heavier. But now, in the deep hours of night, a coolness returned. Not sharp, not sudden, just enough to kiss the cheeks of those still awake. And in a quiet hut near the old well, a woman named Essie sat with her back against the wall, eyes wide open. She hadn't meant to stay awake. She'd even done everything right. Bathed early, drank her herbal tea, laid still, closed her eyes. But her thoughts, like gentle rains, kept falling. Not storms, just steady, drop by drop. One memory, then another, then a thought of tomorrow, then a feeling she couldn't name. And so she wrapped her cloth tighter around her and stepped into the night, her feet moving quietly over the damp sand, her fingers tracing the folds of the cloth like a child looking for a familiar edge. She found Ma'ani's hut just as a breeze lifted the reed curtain gently to one side, as if the hut itself had been waiting. Ma'ani sat by a small clay dish, crushing something soft between her fingers. She looked up only once, then motioned for Essie to sit. There were no greetings. None were needed. The space was already full of welcome. Essie sat on the mat. She folded her legs, and Ma'ani reached behind her and brought out a wooden bowl, carved along the rim with simple waves. She placed it in front of Essie and said, "Breathe into it." Essie looked down, confused. "But there's nothing in it." Ma'ani smiled softly. "That's why it needs your breath." So Essie leaned in. She took a deep breath in and exhaled into the empty bowl. Again and again. With each breath, the bowl filled, not with steam, not with fog, but with warmth, with offering, with presence. Ma'ani reached for a pinch of crushed herb and sprinkled it into the bowl. The leaves danced in the warmth of Essie's breath, swirling slightly before settling. Then Ma'ani dipped a cloth in the mixture and pressed it gently to the back of Essie's neck. "Too many thoughts gather there," she whispered. "We forget how heavy they've become." Essie's eyes fluttered. Her spine loosened. Ma'ani handed her a stone, smooth, oval, cool. "Place this on your belly," she said. "It will help you remember where your breath lives." Essie did. And slowly, her hands fell to her sides. Ma'ani sat beside her. Together they breathed, nothing dramatic, just soft, steady inhales and even softer exhales. In dot, 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 out. In dot, 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 out. The wind outside rustled a few leaves. The candle flame flickered, casting small shapes on the far wall. And Ma'ani began a story. Not loud, not vivid, just quiet enough to ride along the rhythm of the breath. There once was a woman who carried her thoughts in a basket on her head. Every morning, she'd place new ones inside. Things to do, things to worry about, things to understand. And every evening she'd forget to put them down. Until one night she found a place where the earth was soft and warm, and the moon was watching, and she sat there and set the basket down. Isi's breath deepened. Her chest rose slowly, then fell. Ma'ani continued. The woman didn't leave the basket behind. She didn't throw it away. She just let it rest, and she remembered that she didn't have to carry it all the time. The ground could hold it too. Essie's fingers twitched once. The cloth at her neck had cooled, but her body had warmed from inside. She no longer felt the air around her, only the air within her. Software deep, kind. Ma'ani stood and placed a small seed near Isi's mat, a single baobab seed, round and pale. To remind you, she said, that everything grows better after rest. Essie didn't answer. Her mouth was slightly open now, her limbs still. Sleep had arrived, not as escape, but as return. The return to the quiet space within, the one that's always been there, waiting. Ma'ani blew out the candle. The room dimmed completely, and outside, the leaves danced quietly beneath a forgiving moon. The night air was thick with the scent of charcoal and early dew. Somewhere in the distance, a gourd drum let out a single low thump, not as part of a rhythm, not as a call, but like the village itself exhaling. One breath, one sound, one moment of quiet release. And in that silence, Ma'ani rose from her mat. She didn't light a fire. She didn't reach for her herbs. She just stood still. There were some nights when the world did not ask her to prepare. It asked her to listen. And on this night, the listening brought her outside. The sky above was cloudless, black, wide, scattered with stars that blinked slowly as if they too were drifting between wakefulness and sleep. She stepped barefoot into the cool sand, letting the texture press gently into her soles, a reminder that even the earth could cradle. Behind her, the reed curtain rustled. A soft voice called, "Ma'ani?" It was Afi, a woman who rarely spoke above a whisper, who kept her emotions folded neatly between quiet smiles and long silences. She had not come for a story. She had come for space. Ma'ani motioned for her to follow, and together they walked, not toward the hut, but toward the edge of the village where the land sloped gently into a hollow between two hills. There, Ma'ani had prepared something the day before, not knowing who it would be for. A mat made of river reeds, a jug of water cooled by time, and a small pile of leaves, soft, wide, freshly picked from the moonflower plant. She sat first. Afi joined her. They said nothing. Above them, the stars began to fade, not with dawn, but with the softness that comes before true rest. Ma'ani took a leaf from the pile and passed it to Afi. "Place this over your heart," she said. Afi did. The leaf was cool, smooth. She closed her eyes. Ma'ani took another and placed it on her own chest. Together they lay back, staring into the dark sky above. Ma'ani whispered, "Some healing happens when nothing is done." Afi's breath wavered, then steadied. Ma'ani reached for the jug and poured a small amount into a shallow wooden bowl. The water shimmered in the starlight. She dipped her fingers in and flicked a few drops toward the sky. "For the things too heavy to name," she said softly. "For the feelings that don't ask to be fixed. For the weight we carry, even in our sleep." Afi let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her body sank deeper into the mat. Her fingers unclenched. Her eyes stayed closed. Ma'ani began to hum, so faintly the sound didn't seem to leave her lips. It was the hum of a child being rocked, of a mountain wrapped in cloud, of something too soft to describe, but too strong to forget. The leaf on Afi's chest fluttered once with her breath, and then rested. She was floating, not away, but inward, toward a space inside herself she hadn't visited in many years. A space where she wasn't anyone's strength, where she didn't have to hold anyone else, where she could just be, just breathe, just sleep. Ma'ani reached over and placed a second leaf in Afi's palm, curling her fingers gently around it. "For tomorrow," she whispered, "so you remember how this felt." The wind curled around them, brushing over their cloths, slipping under the edge of the mat. The earth hummed faintly beneath them, and Afi slept. Her face softened, her brow smoothed, her breath, deep and even, joined the rhythm of the stars above. Ma'ani did not rise. She stayed beside her, not as a healer, not as a guide, just as someone who knew the way back, to stillness, to softness, to sleep. In the hours just before dawn, the sky turns the color of quiet ash. Not quite dark, not yet light, just a hush stretched across the world like a sleeping cloth. And in this hour, the village barely breathes. The trees hold still. The fires are out. The birds wait. Only the wind moves, slowly, like it is walking barefoot through the dream of the land. Inside her hut, Ma'ani stirred from her mat, not because she was restless, but because something soft had woken her. A presence, not outside, inside. She knew it well. It was the presence of someone trying not to cry. And just as she stood, the curtain at her doorway lifted. A woman stepped in. Her name was Araba. Strong hands, steady shoulders, and eyes that rarely blinked when others watched. She was known for holding families together, for stitching wounds, for answering every call. But tonight, her silence trembled. Ma'ani didn't speak. She walked to the center of the room and lit a small lamp with a twist of dry peel and oil. The flame flickered once, then settled, small, warm, steady. She reached for a calabash filled with smooth stones, not the dark ones used for grounding, but the pale ones used for remembering. She held one up. "Choose 3, she said. Araba knelt slowly, fingers brushing over the surface of the stones. She chose without hesitation. 1, 2, 3. Ma'ani placed them in a shallow bowl and poured warm water over them, whispering gently as steam began to rise. "These stones have listened longer than we've spoken." Araba stared at the bowl, her lips parting just slightly, the way lips do when they almost form a word, but cannot. Ma'ani handed her the bowl. "Breathe into it." Araba inhaled, held, exhaled, and again, and again. The steam rose slowly. The water began to shift slightly, catching the light, forming soft ripples. Then Ma'ani took the bowl and set it beside her. She reached for a cloth bag and from it brought a necklace of beads, but not for wearing. These were story beads, memory beads, sleep beads. She placed them into Araba's hands and said, "Run your fingers along the line. 1 bead per breath. Do not count. Do not rush." Araba did as she was told. Each bead passed beneath her fingertips like small moons. Her breath slowed. Her shoulders softened. Ma'ani lit a second lamp and placed it behind her, letting its shadow fall over both of them. The hut glowed now, not brightly, but enough. "Tell your silence," Ma'ani whispered, "that it can speak now." Araba closed her eyes. A tear slipped quietly down one cheek, and Ma'ani reached forward, catching it on the edge of a cotton cloth. She didn't wipe it away. She folded it in, wrapped the cloth and tied it gently with red thread. "For the ancestors," she said. "They understand tears offered without words." Araba's hands had stopped moving. The beads rested in her lap. Her chest rose, then fell, then rose again, slower now, deeper. Ma'ani reached for a shallow tray of dried petals and blew across the surface. The petals stirred, and from them rose a scent, something like dusk, like old wood and warm honey. She fanned the scent toward Araba with her hand, and began to hum. The notes were low, close to the earth, stitched with warmth. They didn't ask Araba to feel better. They only said, "You do not need to hold everything tonight." Araba tilted sideways. Her cheek rested on the mat. The beads slipped from her fingers, and sleep took her, not fast, not loud, but gently, as if it had been walking beside her all along. Ma'ani sat beside her, fanning the last of the petals. The lamp dimmed. The wind touched the curtain, then moved on. And the silence inside the hut became the kind that heals. It was the 3rd night of the quiet season. The nights were longer now. The stars came earlier and stayed later, blinking lazily behind thin veils of mist. Fires were lit a little earlier. Meals were eaten a little slower. And across the village, everything, even sound, seemed to tread more gently. Inside her hut, Ma'ani sat near a closed jar. It was old, carved from heavy clay, with a lid that had not been opened in nearly a season. She had placed it there for someone specific. She didn't know who, only that they would arrive on a night like this. And they did. Just before moonrise, footsteps approached, not fast, not unsure, but careful, deliberate. A tall man ducked under the curtain. He was wrapped in a deep brown cloth, and though his face was calm, his eyes were full of held breath. His name was Mensa, and he had not rested in many days. Not because he didn't sleep, but because his sleep had grown shallow, thin, like paper stretched too far. Every sound woke him. Every dream slipped from his grip. He had begun to feel like rest was something reserved for others. Ma'ani didn't offer him words. She simply patted the mat. He sat. She reached for the old jar and opened it. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, each one wrapped in bark-thin leaf and tied with faded red thread. She chose one and placed it over the coals. A soft smoke rose, slow, steady, sweet with a bitterness that lingered. Mensa inhaled and closed his eyes. Ma'ani placed her hands flat on the earth, then reached up and placed her fingertips lightly on his shoulders. "You've been walking too long," she said softly, "even in sleep." Mensa nodded, his shoulders rising just slightly. Ma'ani reached for a bowl of warm stones, smooth and heavy, warmed in the fire's edge, and one by one she placed them on his thighs, his arms, and across his chest. Not to press him down, but to remind his body that it could finally stop. She hummed once, low and quiet, then again, and slowly Mensa's breathing shifted. The stones grounded him, the scent wrapped around him, and Ma'ani began the story. "There was once a lion," she said, "who wandered far from the pride. He didn't roar, he didn't hunt, he only moved, day after day, night after night, until the earth, tired of his steps, rose up in a small hill and said, 'Stop.' And the lion said, 'I cannot. I am looking for peace.' And the hill said, 'Then you are walking in the wrong direction. Peace does not live out there. It lives beneath your feet. Lie down, and you will meet it.'" Mensa's mouth parted slightly. The coals shifted, sending up a soft crackle. Ma'ani pressed her palm gently to his forehead. He didn't open his eyes. His hands relaxed. His breath deepened. Outside, the moon rose, a full disk of silver just above the tree line. Ma'ani moved to his feet and wrapped a long cloth around them. "To remind the body it is not walking tonight," she whispered. Then she knelt beside him and blew lightly across the stones on his chest. "They will cool slowly," she said, "just like you." Mensa's face softened, his jaw unhooked from its holding. He sank, not into sleep at first, but into softness, into surrender, and then into silence. Ma'ani reached for the lid and closed the jar again. She would wait for the next. But tonight, this one had found his rest. It had rained in the early afternoon, and by nightfall, the village smelled of clean earth and cool stone. Puddles dotted the walking paths, and every now and then the wind would carry the faint scent of soaked bark and wet thatch. Even the insects were quiet, as if the sky itself had hushed them. Mahani sat beneath the overhang of her hut, her fingers slowly weaving thin strips of dried raffia. Not to make anything, just for the feel of it, the movement, the rhythm. The weaving was a way to slow the mind, a way to match the night's breath. She had just tied one loop when she heard soft steps approach. Not hurried, not light, just hesitant. She looked up. A young woman stood at the edge of the light, her cloak damp at the hem, her hair pushed back as if she'd run her hands through it too many times. Her name was Abena. She had not planned to visit tonight, but when the rain stopped and the sky cleared, something in her feet had begun to move. Her body had taken her here before her mind could ask why. Ma'ani didn't ask. She only gestured inside. Abena stepped in. She sat on the mat like someone who had not been still in days. Ma'ani rose and brought a shallow bowl filled with warm sand. She placed it gently over Abena's knees. "For the thoughts that won't sit still," she murmured. Abena exhaled softly. Ma'ani took a bundle of dried leaves and dipped it into warm water, squeezing it out slowly until the droplets ran down her fingers. She pressed it behind Abena's neck. The warmth melted into her skin, and something inside her softened. Not all at once, but just enough. Ma'ani reached into a clay jar and pulled out 3 pieces of dried fruit, mango, fig, and plum. She placed them one by one in Abena's palm. "Choose one," she said, "but don't eat it." Abena chose the plum. "Why?" she asked. Ma'ani smiled. "Because it holds the feeling you don't have words for yet." Abena nodded, eyes lowering. She closed her fingers around the plum. Ma'ani moved behind her and placed both palms gently over Abena's shoulders. Then she began to rock, not with motion, but with breath. Inhale, exhale, and Abena's breath followed. Inhale, exhale. The hut felt warmer now, as if it too had drawn a blanket over itself. Ma'ani whispered a short phrase, just 4 words, from a language older than stories. Abena didn't know the meaning, but her body did. Her shoulders relaxed, her knees loosened. The bowl of warm sand stayed steady in her lap, and sleep began to gather around her, not as a wave, but as a quiet tide. Ma'ani reached forward and removed the piece of fruit from her hand. She wrapped it in cloth, then tucked it beneath the mat. "It will rest for you," she said, "until you're ready to feel it." Abena's head tilted slightly. Her breathing deepened, and without needing to try, she slipped into sleep. Ma'ani watched for a moment. then stood, pulled the curtain closed, and sat quietly beside the coals. Outside, the puddles glowed with moonlight, and inside, all was still. The sky that night looked like dark silk stretched across a quiet drum, full, still, holding the beat of the sleeping world beneath it. The village fires had all gone out. Only the wind remained, moving slowly between homes, brushing over rooftops like an old song returned to its chorus. And in the heart of her hut, Ma'ani moved her hands gently through a pile of seeds, not to sort them, not to plant them, just to feel them, to listen to the tiny click of each one as it rolled across the surface of the clay dish. She closed her eyes with every pass. Each movement of her hand matched her breath. Inhale, pause, exhale, stillness. Outside, someone approached. Ma'ani didn't look up, but she whispered, "Come." The curtain shifted. A small girl stepped inside. Her name was Amma. She was no more than 6, her night cloth loose around her shoulders, her hair still damp from a rushed evening wash. She carried a woven doll in one hand and worry in the other. Ma'ani smiled softly. She patted the mat beside her. Amma sat but didn't speak. Her legs curled beneath her. Her doll lay in her lap. Ma'ani held out a gourd with a lid carved from shell. "Tell it everything," she said. Amma blinked. "The gourd?" Ma'ani nodded. "It will keep your worries until you wake." Amma hesitated, then held the gourd with both hands. She whispered into it. Once, twice, 3 times. Each word softer than the last. Then she handed it back. Ma'ani tied a cloth around the lid and placed it under the edge of the mat. She reached for a thin string of beads and placed it across Amma's small wrist. "Tonight," she said, "you are guarded by sleep itself." Amma smiled just a little, then yawned. Ma'ani reached for a pouch of dried lavender and tucked it beneath the girl's doll. She pulled a soft shawl over Amma's lap and pressed her palm lightly against the child's back. "You don't need to be brave now," she whispered. "You just need to rest." Amma closed her eyes. Ma'ani began to hum. A round sound, low and soft, like a gourd rolling across warm stone. Outside, the wind quieted, and the stars blinked slower. Amma didn't fight the sleep. She didn't even notice it arriving. Her breath deepened. Her fingers loosened. Her doll slipped sideways against her chest, and her body gave itself fully to the hush. Ma'ani sat beside her, one hand resting gently on the mat, the other pressed against her own heart. She whispered a short prayer, a small, invisible gift tucked into the folds of the girl's dream. Then she blew gently toward the roof, and the lamp dimmed. The night was quiet, but not because nothing was happening. It was the kind of quiet that holds everything: the rustling of trees, the the shift of stars, the soft sighs of sleeping children, wrapped in stillness, like a blanket pulled over the whole village. Inside her hut, Ma'ani sat with her back to the fire. She wasn't facing the flame. She didn't need to. The warmth behind her was enough. A glow, a presence, a hum. She was holding something in her lap, a small wooden box carved with waves and birds and tiny patterns that only revealed themselves when the light bent a certain way. It hadn't been opened in many moons, but tonight it called. She gently lifted the lid. Inside were feathers, 6 of them, each one from a bird that had flown above the village and left something behind. 1 white, 1 gold, 1 soft brown, 1 nearly black, 1 with a streak of green, and 1 just gray, balanced, unassuming. Ma'ani took that one, held it between her palms, and breathed. Outside, the curtain stirred, and someone stepped in. A man. His name was Kwabena. He worked with stone, carving, building, lifting. His arms were strong, his back was broad, but his eyes tonight were tired in a way that muscle could not carry. He sat without speaking. Ma'ani turned to face him. She placed the feather in his hand. He looked down. "It's small," he whispered. "So is breath," she replied. He held the feather gently, and Ma'ani knelt beside him. She placed a warm stone in the space behind his neck, where stress lives without name. Then she lit a clay dish filled with coconut ash and crushed lemongrass. The scent rose slowly, bright at first, then soft, like memory dissolving into calm. She took a bit of the ash and drew a line across his palm. "You don't have to carry the whole day inside your hands," she said. "Let this line be where it ends." Kwabena exhaled through his nose, not loud but heavy. Ma'ani placed both her hands on his knees. She looked into his eyes and began to whisper. Not a story, just reminders. You are not too late. You are not too tired. You are not alone in your silence. Each phrase fell like a warm cloth over cold stone. Kwabena's head dipped. The feather slipped slightly in his grip. Ma'ani guided him gently onto the mat, laid him down with the care one gives to something old and sacred. She took the gray feather and tucked it under the cloth at his chest. "So, you remember softness," she said. She pressed her palm once to his chest, felt the slow rise, the slow fall. Then she blew lightly across his face, and he sank, not into dreams, not yet, but into something quieter, the space just before sleep, where the body asks no questions, where the mind forgets it ever needed answers, where peace does not explain itself, it only waits to be accepted. Kwabena's breath deepened, the feather remained, The ash line smudged gently as his fingers relaxed. Ma'ani sat beside him. She said nothing more. The fire burned low behind her. Outside, a single bird called into the night, not to wake anyone, just to remind the dark that it, too, has a voice. And inside the hut, two hearts beat slowly, one asleep, one watching. It had been a warm day, but now the night wrapped itself in a shawl of coolness. The stars were quiet again, suspended like beads on a black thread. The moon, a thin crescent, floated low above the trees, not shining, but watching. Inside her hut, Ma'ani sat near her smallest bowl. It was carved from dark wood, smoothed at the rim by time and thumb. She used it only when the soul that came to her did not know what it needed. It was not a bowl for medicine. It was a bowl for remembering. Tonight, she filled it with nothing. She let the night pour into it. Let it catch the silence. And when the curtain shifted and a figure stepped into the doorway, the bowl was ready. The visitor was a girl named Na. She didn't speak. She walked to the mat like someone who had walked too far inside her own mind. Ma'ani motioned for her to sit. She placed the bowl between them and waited. Na's hands trembled slightly. She held them tightly together, as if letting go would allow everything inside her to spill out. Ma'ani reached for a strip of cloth and wrapped it around Na's wrists, not to bind, but to cradle. Let this hold what you no longer have strength to carry, she said softly. Then she reached for a pouch filled with dried roots and petals, soft, delicate, golden brown like old light. She dropped a small pinch into the empty bowl. A scent rose. It smelled of sleep that hadn't happened yet, of comfort still waiting to arrive. Ma'ani didn't speak again. She simply reached over and brushed Na's hair back from her forehead, then placed a tiny drop of oil just at the center, between her brows. For the part of you that still remembers calm, she whispered. Na's breath hitched, and then slowly, it deepened. The bowl sat quietly between them, still almost empty, but not really. It now held her ache, her silence, her fear, and the space Ma'ani had made for all of it. Ma'ani reached for a seed, small, polished, the color of riverbed stone. She placed it in Na's palm and wrapped her fingers gently around it. This seed doesn't know how it will grow, she said, but it trusts the dark. Na blinked, not to stay awake, but because her eyes were already beginning to close. Her body folded slightly, forward, then back, then down onto the mat, her head resting near the bowl. Ma'ani draped a cloth across her shoulders, soft, woven with threads dipped in moon tea from weeks ago. The kind of cloth that remembers lullabies. The coals in the fire tray dimmed, and the scent of petals lingered. Ma'ani didn't hum. She didn't need to. The quiet did the work now. Na's fingers uncurled, the seed rested in her palm, and her breath fell into rhythm with the night. The wind was slow that night, slow in a way that felt thoughtful. It touched the tops of the trees first, then made its way down to the grasses, and finally brushed the earth, quiet and curious. It did not howl. It didn't rustle or stir. It only moved, like a hand running gently along the spine of the world. Mahani sat just inside the doorway of her hut, feet flat to the earth, her shawl pulled loosely around her shoulders. The air was cool, but not sharp. It had the softness of water that had been left in clay, aged, settled, humble. In front of her, 3 small bundles lay unwrapped on a mat. Each one held something different. A braid of dried grass, a length of old thread, and a stone that had never been polished, smooth by nature alone. She hadn't chosen them. They had simply been waiting. She knew that when someone arrived tonight, they would know which was theirs. And just as the wind circled once around the doorpost, someone came. A quiet figure. She walked as if she was still deciding whether she wanted to arrive. Her name was Serwai. Her face was soft and tired, not from sorrow, not from loss, just from holding too many thoughts in the same breath for too long. She stood in the doorway until Ma'ani looked up and smiled. Then, without a word, she entered and sat cross-legged on the mat. Ma'ani placed the 3 bundles between them. Serwa stared, then reached, slowly, for the thread. The length was long, frayed in places, curled where it had once been wrapped tightly. She held it gently. Ma'ani nodded once, then rose to warm a small pot beside the coals. Inside it was water steeped with hibiscus and a shred of old fig bark. She poured a little into a tiny cup and handed it over. Serwa sipped once, and the rest of her body seemed to remember how to sit. Not upright, not poised, but loose, low, like someone letting themselves be held. Ma'ani leaned forward and wrapped the thread loosely around Serwa's wrist. Not tight, just enough to be felt. Then she whispered, "Every time you have held something together, a task, a family, a dream, you've become this thread. Strong, but tired. Tonight, the thread will hold you." Serwa nodded. Not because she fully understood, but because she was ready to rest. Ma'ani pulled a soft gourd cloth from the basket and draped it across her legs. She placed a pinch of crushed leaves into a shallow dish and blew lightly across them. The scent was faint. Lemon, bark, and something beneath it, like warmth from a memory you'd forgotten you loved. Then she spoke. "Once," Ma'ani said, "there was a woman who carried a long thread in her pouch. She never told anyone why. But each night, before she lay down, she'd place it across her chest like a ribbon. And each morning she would fold it carefully away. One day, someone asked her why. She said, 'So I remember that everything I held today no longer needs my grip by night.'" Serwa let out a long, slow breath. Her shoulders fell. Ma'ani reached forward and took her hands, not to guide, but to pause. Then she lowered Serwa onto the mat, slowly, gently, like placing something delicate into water. She tucked the end of the thread beneath the mat, as if anchoring it. Then she hummed. One soft note, then another, each tone like a hand smoothing out wrinkles in the air. Serwa's eyes closed, her lips softened, her fingers curled slightly toward her palms, and the thread remained, resting lightly against her skin, a quiet tether to peace. Ma'ani leaned back and let the coals burn low. The wind slipped under the edge of the door frame, and in the quiet of the hut, another story had finished without ending. It had been a clear night. The stars were high and sharp, the kind of stars that made you feel like someone was watching, not with judgment, but with quiet care. The trees stood still, their leaves resting, their trunks holding stories older than language. In the space between two huts, a thin stream of water trickled, a small overflow from the clay cisterns built after the last heavy rains. The stream made no sound most days, but tonight it murmured softly, like a voice trying not to wake anyone. Ma'ani had moved her mat outside, not far, just beyond the doorway under a cluster of hanging vines where the moonlight slipped through in gentle slants. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her hands resting in her lap, holding a small pouch of dried fruit stones. Seeds that had once fed many now carried only memory. She picked one out, rolled it between her fingers, waited, because tonight was not a night for calling anyone. It was a night for someone to arrive on their own. And soon she heard footsteps, light ones, like someone who didn't want to be found, but hoped they would be. A young boy stepped into view. His name was Kojo. He wasn't from the center of the village. He lived just beyond the tall grass, where the soil stayed soft even during the dry moons. He often played by himself, and lately he had not been sleeping well. His father said he cried in his dreams. His mother said he talked in his sleep. Strange things, half sentences, names no one knew. But Kojo remembered nothing. He only knew he woke each morning feeling as though he had run far and fast. He stood beside Ma'ani's mat and looked down. She didn't speak, just patted the edge beside her. He sat, cross-legged, still. Ma'ani handed him the seed. "Do you know what this is?" she asked. Kojo looked at it, shook his head. "It used to hold sweetness," she said. "Now it holds stillness." He didn't answer. He just kept turning it in his hand. Ma'ani reached for a bowl of warm millet water and dipped a cloth into it. She gently pressed it to the back of his neck. He shivered, but not from cold. Then sighed. A long, low sound that made Ma'ani smile. She placed her palm on the center of his chest, over his thin shirt, and said, "This is where the dreams settle before they leave. Sometimes they get stuck." Kojo blinked. His hand closed around the seed. His body leaned slightly into her touch. She reached into the pouch and brought out a second stone, this one darker, heavier, warm from her skin. She placed it at the center of his forehead. "You won't carry them tonight," she said. "The dreams?" He whispered the words, barely audible. Ma'ani nodded. "They will rest in the seed. They will pass through the stone. You will not carry them." She began to hum, slow, like water winding through stone. Kojo lay down, curling slightly, knees drawn. His hand still held the seed. His breath slowed, and the wind returned, just enough to lift a few leaves from the ground, just enough to remind the village that night had not yet finished its work. Ma'ani placed a shawl over him, one woven with soft lines, the kind that looked like waves but felt like sky. She pressed her fingers once to his temple, then to his belly, then back to her own chest, and sat, still. The coals inside her hut cracked softly in the distance, but out here, under the hanging vines, under the hush of moonlight, Kojo slept, without dreams, without motion, without fear. And the seed? It stayed with him, not for answers, but for release. The moon was hidden tonight, not gone, just veiled behind thick clouds that moved slowly, like curtains being drawn by a patient hand. The darkness that fell over the village was deep, but not cold. It felt like a room where someone had just finished singing, full of silence, but warm. In the far corner of her hut, Ma'ani sat with a shallow bowl of sand. She'd drawn a pattern in it earlier, just using her fingers. A spiral, then a path, then the outline of a leaf. Nothing stayed. She'd smooth the surface and begin again, over and over. It wasn't for meaning, it was for rhythm. That was when she heard the knock. Software 3 taps, then nothing. She opened the curtain to find a young woman standing with her head bowed. Her name was Ayele. Her hands were tucked into the folds of her cloth. Her face was calm, but beneath it, Ma'ani could feel the tremble of something long held in. "I thought I was sleeping," Ayele said quietly, "but I wasn't. My eyes were closed, but my mind kept moving." Ma'ani stepped aside. Inside the hut, the coals glowed faintly in their dish, and the spiral in the sand bowl was still clear. Ayele sat without being asked. She folded her legs, rested her hands on her knees, and lowered her gaze to the floor. Ma'ani reached for a small pot of cooled oil, steeped for weeks with the bark of the silk tree and petals gathered under the new moon. She dipped 2 fingers into it, then reached across and gently pressed a small circle onto Ayele's sternum, just beneath her throat. "This is where your voice rests," she said, "even when you don't speak." Ayele closed her eyes. Ma'ani placed a cloth across her shoulders. The corners weighted slightly with beads that smelled faintly of rain. "Tonight, you don't need to hold the silence," she whispered. "Let it hold you." Then she reached for a calabash gourd filled with tiny shells. She poured a handful into Ayeli's lap. Each one clicked lightly against the next, their surfaces worn smooth from years of movement. Ma'ani whispered, "Choose one. Not the prettiest, not the smallest, just the one that feels like it wants to be chosen." Ayele reached down, picked up a pale, open-mouthed shell, shaped like a sleeping eye. Ma'ani took it from her and placed it in a bowl of warm tea. "Now it will listen for you," she said. "For what?" Ayele asked, her voice a thread. "For everything you didn't say." She placed the bowl beside the mat, and the shell floated quietly in the steam. Ayele lay back, slowly, her hands at her sides, the cloth shifting gently with her breath. Ma'ani touched her temples with the last of the oil, then spoke. Not a story, but a sound. A single, repeated hum. Each time softer. Each time longer. Ayele's chest rose, fell, rose again, and her body, which had been held upright by days of unshed feeling, now surrendered to gravity, to quiet, to the space Ma'ani had made for her. Outside, the clouds moved. The moon stayed hidden. But inside the hut, something glowed. Something eased. Ayele's fingers twitched once, then stilled. Ma'ani watched as her breath became slow and round. She reached for the shell and placed it in a small woven pouch. "When you wake," she whispered, "you will not remember what you told it, but it will remember for you." The spiral in the sand was still visible, and now, beside it, another one began. The sky that night had a softness to it, not just in its color, but in the way it wrapped around everything below. It wasn't the kind of night that asked for stories. It was the kind that listened. Ma'ani stood beside her fire pot, stirring a quiet brew. Not boiling, just warm. The kind of warmth that seeps into the bones and reminds the body that it belongs to the earth, not the clock. Tonight, she had added cinnamon bark and crushed bay leaf, not for flavor, but for memory. Somewhere outside, a palm branch rustled gently. Then a faint cough. Then silence. Ma'ani looked toward the doorway. She didn't speak, didn't call. She waited. And after a moment, someone appeared. A tall woman with eyes like night soil. Rich, deep, layered with everything she had buried over time. Her name was Ano. She had been here once, moons ago, but this time her walk was different. She moved like someone who had spent too long doing things the right way, and was finally too tired to keep performing strength. Ma'ani stepped aside. Ano entered without words. She sat, and for a while nothing was said. Ma'ani handed her a bowl, small, round, filled halfway with the warm brew. Ano took it in both hands, held it just beneath her chin, and inhaled. Her shoulders softened. Ma'ani lit a bundle of dried grasses and moved it once around Eno's head. Then lower, across her back, down her arms, across her legs. Your breath is asking for permission to rest, she said gently. You can grant it now. Ino blinked slowly. Ma'ani reached for a cloth folded on the side. She unwrapped it. Inside, a string of soft bells, barely the size of seeds, woven into the edge of a scarf. She draped the scarf around Ino's shoulders, the tiny bells quiet as dust. They do not ring loudly, she said, but they remember every step you've taken. Eno pressed a hand against her chest, closed her eyes, and Ma'ani placed her hand over Ino's. Together they breathed, just once, then again, and then the night deepened. Ma'ani began to speak, so softly that the air barely caught her words. There was a woman who walked the forest with quiet bells on her shoulders. No one heard her, but the trees did, and each time she passed, they whispered back, not to guide her, not to question her, but to say, "We see you," even in silence. Ino exhaled long and low, the kind of breath that empties the space behind the ribs. She laid down. Ma'ani adjusted the scarf so the bells rested against the floor. They made no sound, but Ino's body shifted into stillness, into surrender. Ma'ani placed a pebble near her heel, a grounding ritual, old as root and rain. She whispered, "When you wake, the path will not feel heavy, because you have allowed the night to carry it." The brew on the coals steamed gently. Ino's breathing slowed, and outside, the leaves whispered again, this time not from movement, but from memory. There was a stillness in the air that night that seemed to echo, not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that follows something sacred, like a drum that has just been struck, its sound still moving through the space even though the hands are still. Ma'ani sat with a small bowl of salt beside her. She didn't use it for taste. She used it for memory. Salt, she believed, was one of the only things that could remember tears. Not just carry them, but hold their weight long after they had dried. She had crushed the crystals earlier that evening, using the back of a spoon carved from palm wood. The sound of it, soft, grinding, like rain on stone, had called in the quiet around her. She had known someone would come. And they did. Not with sound, not with words, with breath. A man stood in the doorway. He was older than the others who came. Lines framed his eyes. His beard was touched with gray. His fingers twitched slightly, not with nerves, but with a kind of held energy, like a bird unused to stillness. His name was Teta, and he had not slept well in years. He used to laugh loudly, people said, used to sing at the river, used to tell stories with his whole body. But life had pressed its weight on him, slowly, gradually, like the tide on a stone. Now, he rarely spoke, rarely smiled, and when he slept, his dreams ran hard and fast, like dogs chasing things they couldn't name. Ma'ani nodded for him to sit, He did, slowly, knees cracking like old wood. She reached for the salt and poured a small amount into a shallow dish. Then she drizzled in a few drops of warm water. It didn't dissolve. It just became soft. She dipped a bit of cotton cloth into it and handed it to him. "For your hands," she said, "so they remember they don't have to build tonight." Teta rubbed the cloth slowly between his palms. His fingers twitched again, then relaxed. Ma'ani lit a small lamp and placed it beside him. It gave off a warm, low glow. Enough to see the walls, but not enough to wake the corners. Then she reached for an old book, not one to be read, but one that held nothing but blank pages. She opened to the middle, tore out a single sheet, and folded it into a shape. Not a bird, not a flower, something in between. She handed it to him. "This is the thing you haven't said," she whispered. "You don't have to say it now, but keep it near." Teta placed it on the mat beside him, his eyes softening. Ma'ani placed a smooth stone in his lap. Heavy, round, cool. "For the part of you that thinks it still needs to carry everything," she said. He held it with both hands, closed his eyes, and breathed. Ma'ani began to speak, her voice slow and low, like a story being poured rather than told. "There was once a man who built too many things with his hands, houses, boats, walls. But one day he forgot how to rest. His hands twitched even in sleep. So the earth gave him a stone, not to build with, but to hold, to remind him he could stop, that he was not made only for making." Teta's breathing deepened. He leaned back slightly. The stone rested on his stomach now, rising, falling. Ma'ani reached forward and placed a folded cloth across his chest, woven from fibers dipped in moon tea and old prayers. Then she said nothing more. Teta's body softened, his jaw slackened, and the paper shape beside him fluttered once, then stilled. Outside, the wind passed gently along the hut's walls. Inside, everything settled, even the salt. The clouds hung low, heavy with unshed rain. But they held, not out of defiance but as a kindness, allowing the night to stretch just a little longer before the world was washed clean again. Inside the hut, Ma'ani worked quietly with her fingertips in a shallow bowl of millet flour, smoothing its surface with slow, spiraling motions. The flour was cool and soft, like powdered hush, and she found comfort in the way it yielded to her touch without resistance. Tonight, she had lit no fire. The hut was dark, except for the gentle flicker of a small oil lamp placed near the doorway. Its light didn't chase away the shadows. It invited them to sit closer, gently, as if the darkness too needed to be comforted. And in that softened space, someone stepped in. A woman, older than most. Her back bent not by age but by years of quiet service. Her name was Adwoa. She had nursed the sick, held crying children, watched loved ones pass, buried memories beneath her tongue. She didn't speak now. She simply knelt. Ma'ani did not ask why she'd come. She reached instead for a small cloth bag, the one filled with the night dust, ash from burned petals, dried leaves, and memories offered to flame. She sprinkled a small pinch into the flower bowl. Then she drew another spiral. Adwoa watched in silence. Then Ma'ani pressed her palm flat into the bowl. Not hard, just enough to leave an imprint. She gestured for Adwoa to do the same. Adwoa hesitated, then slowly pressed her hand into the soft powder beside Ma'ani's. 2 imprints, one beside the other. Ma'ani leaned closer. Even the earth remembers gentle hands, she said. Then she covered both handprints with a piece of woven cloth, pinning its corners with 4 smooth pebbles. They don't need to give tonight, she whispered. They only need to be held. Adwoa closed her eyes. Ma'ani moved behind her and brushed a line of warm oil down the center of her spine. It was a simple oil, made from shea and crushed guava leaf, but it had been steeped during the last full moon, and it carried a softness that didn't fade. She wrapped a shawl around Adwoa's shoulders, pulling it snug like arms from a long-lost sister. Then she spoke. There was once a woman who poured herself into every empty cup, until one day her own cup cracked. She didn't notice at first. She kept pouring, but the earth noticed, and one night, while she slept, the earth filled her cup again, not with water, but with rest. Adwoa's body began to lean, her head tilted gently to the side. Ma'ani supported her with a palm behind her shoulder, easing her down onto the mat. The shawl folded naturally around her. Ma'ani placed one last thing into her hand, a small dried bloom from the last rain, unopened, silent, still whole. For the self you've never let bloom, she whispered. Adwoa exhaled, once, then again, then fell into a breath deeper than she'd allowed herself in many, many nights. The oil lamp flickered once, then steadied. The flower bowl remained between them, covered, the handprints resting beneath the cloth like prayers never spoken, but fully heard. And the clouds outside did not cry. They waited, as did Ma'ani, as did the earth. The wind had shifted. It didn't blow strong or loud, but it moved with intention, as if delivering something invisible from tree to tree, hut to hut. Even the animals noticed. The goats near the courtyard lay still. The birds, already tucked beneath thatch and branch, didn't stir. Inside, Ma'ani had set out a circle of stones, 7 of them, each gathered from a different place, one from the river bend, one from beneath the old fig tree, one from the edge of the broken wall, and 4 others from places that didn't have names, only feelings. She placed them in a ring around a bowl of cool water. The bowl itself was nothing special, but tonight it would become something sacred, because she knew someone was coming who had forgotten how to see clearly in the dark. And then he arrived. slow steps, a pause at the doorway. A man in his late 30s. His name was Quasi. He had the look of someone who'd tried to be strong for too long. Not worn out, but thinned. As if some part of him had been whispering, "You can rest now." But he hadn't known how to listen. Ma'ani nodded toward the mat. He sat, not slowly, not fast, but like someone unsure if he was allowed to exhale. Ma'ani passed him the bowl of water. "Look inside," she said. Quasi leaned forward, saw his reflection in the moonlit surface. "It doesn't look like me," he whispered. Ma'ani smiled gently. "It's not supposed to. It shows what is quiet in you, the part that doesn't speak but feels everything." She handed him a sprig of dried leaf and a feather. "Stir once," she said. He did. The reflection swirled and disappeared. "What do I see now?" "You," Ma'ani replied, "without the story." Quasi closed his eyes. Ma'ani dipped her fingers into the water and flicked 3 droplets onto the stones. Each one sizzled slightly, not from heat, but from memory. Then she took a deep breath and began to speak. "There was once a man who carried a torch into every room. He wanted to help others see, but in lighting the way, he forgot how to walk in the dark. One day, the torch went out, and in the dark, he found he still had feet, still had breath, still had direction." Quasi opened his eyes slowly. His shoulders had fallen away from his ears. His hands rested on his knees, not clenched, not searching, just still. Ma'ani placed one of the stones in his palm. "This one remembers laughter," she said. "You don't have to force it, just sleep near it." Quasi nodded, barely. Ma'ani helped him lie back. She placed the feather beneath his head, the leaf on his chest, and the stone remained in his palm. His body settled, not because he was exhausted, but because he was finally allowed to stop being the fire, allowed to sit in the night without trying to light it. Ma'ani hummed, low, like a drum before the beat begins. Outside, the wind turned again, and somewhere in the trees, a soft rustle whispered, "Rest." Quasi didn't answer. He didn't have to. His body already had. The night sky was veiled again, not from clouds, but from something softer, something quieter. The stars glowed behind a thin mist, as though wrapped in sheer cloth, their brilliance dimmed in kindness to those below who needed gentleness, not grandeur. Inside her hut, Ma'ani sat with a shallow basket of ash and flower petals. She stirred them slowly with a carved wooden spoon, mixing memory with memory, scent with silence. Each petal was dried from a bloom, gifted during someone's moment of joy. Each bit of ash came from a branch burned during mourning. Together they told the whole story, the bright and the shadow, no part left behind. And then the curtain stirred. A child stepped inside. She was no more than 10, barefoot, her curls loose, her eyes wide with questions she hadn't dared to ask aloud. Her name was Efua. She stood with her arms at her sides, not fearful, just unsure whether she was allowed to speak in a place this quiet. Ma'ani gave her a small nod and patted the mat. Efua sat cross-legged, her knees pulled close. Ma'ani reached for a gourd filled with dried corn silk and sweet lemongrass. She pinched a bit into a cloth sachet and handed it to the girl. "Place it under your shirt, near your heart," she said. Efua did. "Why?" Ma'ani smiled. "Because some hearts don't know they can rest until someone gives them something soft to lean against." Efua looked down. Her fingers played with the edge of the cloth. Ma'ani didn't push. Instead, she reached for a second basket, this one filled with shells. She spilled them onto the mat, each one different. Some chipped, some whole, some smooth as rain-polished stone. She whispered, "Pick one." Efua reached, then hesitated, then picked the one with the smallest crack. Ma'ani took it and held it up. "This one remembers the ache that's small but steady," she said. "The one you don't talk about because it doesn't shout." Efua looked at her hands, then at the flame in the corner of the hut, then at nothing. Ma'ani placed the shell on a cloth and rolled it into a pouch. "You don't need to tell me what it is," she said gently. "But tonight, this shell will hold it for you, while you sleep." Efua's breath wavered once, then steadied. Ma'ani reached behind her and unwrapped a blanket. It had belonged to someone long gone, woven from stories told by firelight and laughter. She wrapped it around the child's back and arms like a long, quiet hug. Then Ma'ani sang. No words, just sound, just warmth. A lullaby not meant for ears, but for bones. Efua leaned, just slightly. Her head rested on Ma'ani's shoulder. Her fingers loosened, and her breath fell into rhythm with the story the blanket already knew. The coals in the dish pulsed faintly, and the night deepened without noise. Efua did not cry. She did not speak. She only released. And Ma'ani held the silence like a mother would hold a child. Not tightly, not urgently, just fully. The mist outside thickened. The stars shimmered softly, like things seen through half-closed eyes. And in the small, sacred hut at the edge of the village, one little heart finally gave itself to sleep. The night air carried a scent, faint but unmistakable, burned wood, crushed mint, the trace of early rain on old soil. It drifted in like a memory, not of something lived, but of something the heart had always longed for. The kind of memory that doesn't speak, only settles. Ma'ani stood barefoot at the edge of her doorway, eyes half-lidded, listening to the silence between the night sounds, that hollow place where the world breathes and doesn't need to be understood. The moon, hidden behind clouds, still managed to leave a soft glow over the tops of the trees. It wasn't bright, but it was present. Inside the hut, a small mat had been laid out near the back wall. It was woven tightly, the kind made only by elder hands, those that understood patience not as a skill, but as a language. Tonight's guest came slowly, not because he was unsure, but because he carried grief, the kind that walks carefully so it doesn't spill. His name was Otto. He didn't lower his head when he entered. He didn't fold his arms or shuffle. He stood tall because grief had reshaped his spine, not broken it. Ma'ani motioned to the mat. He sat. His eyes were not red, they were dry, but the dryness was heavy, not healed. Ma'ani reached for a stone bowl filled with dark powder, ground from the bark of a mourning tree, mixed with oil and river salt. She dipped 2 fingers in and pressed 3 short lines across Otto's shoulder. "Grief is not a wound to hide," she said. "It's a room that needs dusting." He didn't nod, but his breath deepened. She placed a smooth stone beside him, cool, rounded, silent. "For the names you haven't said aloud," she murmured. Then she brought over a hollow gourd filled with warm tea, not for drinking, but for holding. He gripped it. It was warm like a remembered embrace. Ma'ani didn't tell him to lie down. She only hummed, softly, like breath over a bone flute. And as she hummed, she placed petals, dried hibiscus and sage leaf, at the corners of the mat. One for sorrow, one for memory, one for forgiveness, one for peace. Then she told a story. There was once a man who carried grief like a drum on his back, not to beat, but to remember. Every step it sounded, not loudly, just enough. One night, he entered a village where the people had forgotten how to sing. He did not play the drum. He laid it down, and the wind played it for him. A soft rhythm, a reminder. The people listened, and the village remembered its voice. Otto closed his eyes. The gourd stayed in his hands, but his grip loosened. The stone near his hip seemed to catch the weight he was no longer holding. Ma'ani leaned forward and blew lightly across his forehead. He didn't flinch, didn't stir, but his shoulders fell just slightly, like a roof finally trusting the ground beneath it. The coals in the fire dimmed, the mist thickened outside, and the petals lay still. Otto's body had not moved much, but sleep had found him anyway. Not because he chased it, but because he'd stopped running. Ma'ani sat beside him. No sound, no story now, just presence, and the quiet hum of the night remembering that rest, too, is sacred. The wind had changed direction again. It swept in low from the east, carrying the scent of wild lemongrass and the distant hush of water moving through stone. It was the kind of wind that made lantern flames lean gently to one side, as if bowing to the unseen. Ma'ani was already awake, not because she couldn't sleep, but because her rest often came in quiet watching. She sat by the open window, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, sipping a bowl of tea steeped with orange peel and wild bark. The fire had long since died, but its warmth lingered in the earth around it. Tonight, the silence felt unusually thick, not heavy, but full, like the world was waiting for something gentle to unfold. And then he came. A man in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, eyes lined with years of listening but not often speaking. His name was Kojo Mensa. He had always walked quickly, his work, his words, his worries. But tonight, he walked as though he'd finally accepted that the night could not be hurried. Ma'ani did not speak. She gestured to a round, low stool across from her. He sat. Their eyes met only once, long enough to agree that no explanations were needed. Kojo removed a small piece of folded cloth from his pocket. He unwrapped it and placed it in Ma'ani's hand. Inside, a single earring. Tarnished, bent, old. Ma'ani turned it over once in her palm, then placed it on a folded napkin between them. "She never got to say goodbye," he said. It was the only sentence he'd offer. Ma'ani nodded and reached for a pouch of ground kola nut and ash, mixing it with a drop of moon water collected weeks before. She dabbed the mixture behind each of Kojo's ears, just where memory often hides in plain sight. Then she lit a small bundle of dry husk and leaf and set it in a clay bowl at their feet. The smoke curled upward, not wild, not thick, but slow, like fingers smoothing wrinkles in the air. Ma'ani began to hum. Not a song, just a tone, warm and low, like a voice heard through cloth, comforting even when the words are lost. Then she placed a soft strip of bark across Kojo's palm. "This is the part of her still walking with you," she said. "Not loud, not visible, but present." Kojo closed his fingers over it, not tightly, not protectively, just knowingly. He breathed in the smoke, let his shoulders fall, and Ma'ani leaned forward to press a bead, carved from palm seed and worn smooth, onto his chest, right above the heart. "For release," she whispered, "for what must be held no more." He lay down slowly, as if the mat had always known he would return to it. Ma'ani tucked a shawl over him. It had been dyed with river indigo and sun-dried with prayers woven into each crease. She sat beside him and whispered. There was once a man who built great things, not with stone or wood, but with his presence. His laughter filled rooms. His stillness could soften storms. When he was gone, those he loved searched for monuments, but the earth had already made one. Inside their quiet moments, inside the warmth that never left. Kojo's breathing deepened. His grip on the bark softened. The smoke thinned and spiraled toward the rafters. Outside, the wind bowed again, not in farewell, but in reverence. And in the hush that followed, Ma'ani pressed her palm to the earth and whispered one final word. Rest. There was no moon tonight, not even a sliver. But the darkness did not feel empty. It felt full, like a closed eye still dreaming. The kind of night that makes candles unnecessary and welcomes shadows as old companions. Inside her hut, Ma'ani was weaving. Not cloth, not rope. She was weaving silence. Each strand was made of something different. The hush between breaths, the pause before sleep, the stillness beneath thought. Her hands didn't move, but her presence stitched the room into calmness. She had prepared a place near the window, a mat, a folded cloth, a bowl of cooled oil with 3 drops of starflower essence. She hadn't been told who was coming, but she knew. And when the curtain lifted and the figure stepped in, everything clicked gently into place. It was Abana, a woman not known for softness. Her back had been straight all her life, her eyes sharp. She was someone who always had the answer, always held the space, always kept going. But tonight, she didn't want to lead. She wanted to be led. Ma'ani rose and walked to her with no words, only a cloth soaked in warm water and steeped with dried mango leaf and a hint of lime peel. She pressed it gently to Abena's hands, then her forehead, then the back of her neck. Each time, the cloth took something: heat, tension, memory. Abena didn't speak, but she wept, not with sobs, not with shudders, just tears that fell like rain that had been waiting too long to arrive. Ma'ani sat her down on the mat, then placed a bowl of cooled ash in front of her. Ash from firewood burned for births and for farewells. She dipped her finger in and drew a simple spiral over Abena's heart. Let it open, she whispered. Let it soften. Abena closed her eyes. Her breathing stilled. Ma'ani lit a bundle of dry lavender and charred mint stem and passed it in slow circles above her. Then told a story. There was once a woman who carried a lantern wherever she went. Others followed. They were comforted. They were healed. But one night she placed the lantern down and sat in the dark. No one knew what to do, until one by one, they lit their own. Abena's fingers unclenched. Her jaw softened. She lay back. The cloth was pulled over her body like a sky of rest, and Ma'ani placed a tiny dried berry in the center of her palm. For the sweetness you've forgotten you deserve, she whispered. The oil in the bowl caught the last flicker of firelight. A single drop shimmered and fell. And in that drop, a silence deeper than sleep opened up, not empty, but filled with everything Ma'ani never needed to say out loud. Abena's breath settled. The spiral glowed faintly on her chest, marked not by light, but by release. The night breathed with her, slow, steady, eternal. And now, my friend, as you lie here, wrapped in stillness, wrapped in story, know that you are safe, you are held, and you are allowed to let go. Let go of the weight of the day. Let go of the roles, the rushing, the remembering. Let go of the effort. There's nothing more you need to be tonight. You've wandered through the gentle rhythms of the village. You've listened to Ma Ani's voice, soft and steady as nightfall. You've touched silence in ways you may not even realize. And that's enough. Your breath is enough. Your presence here is enough. Whether you're still awake or already drifting far beyond this story, I want you to know this. You deserve peace. You deserve rest. And you are not alone. I'll be here each night with another gentle chapter, just like this one. So, if sleep doesn't come right away, don't worry. You can always press play again, or just let the quiet carry you the rest of the way. From my sanctuary to yours, good night, and sleep well.